Welcome to Key Tech. Please describe this channel if you are interested in today's video. As we all know, Huawei's significant technological breakthroughs in the 5G field have led to a series of repressive measures against the Chinese tech company in the West. These include restrictions on chip manufacturing and software licensing, aimed at hindering Huawei in the 5G era and potentially depriving it of its leading position in high-tech fields like 5G. However, external blockades and suppression have not forced this Chinese company to succumb. With the gradual return of its Kirin chips and the gradual expansion of its 5G business revenue in overseas markets, Huawei has emerged from the crisis and become a leading company in the domestic tech industry. Recent news from Spain has completely shaken the defenses of the US and the EU. The news reports that the Spanish government has signed and purchased a batch of Huawei equipment worth €12 million for law enforcement and intelligence agencies to store data. I also checked the source of the information, and the Spanish media outlet The Objective reported that Spain and the Chinese tech company Huawei have signed a €12 million equipment procurement contract. In the future, Huawei will provide hardware to Spanish law enforcement and intelligence agencies to store data generated by judge-authorized wiretapping. This completely shatters the West's long-held Huawei threat theory. A key point in the US's smear campaign against Huawei's 5G equipment is its claim that it poses security risks and could lead to the leakage of confidential data. However, the US and the West have long failed to provide any concrete evidence to support this claim. Instead, Huawei publicly claims that its equipment undergoes security testing under public standards and is willing to sign a no-backdoor agreement with the outside world. In my opinion, it's not that Huawei's equipment poses security risks, but rather that it's too secure. This prevents US intelligence agencies from stealing data through Huawei's network equipment. This is why the US has been widely smearing Huawei's security issues in the West and calling on allies to boycott Huawei's network equipment. Spanish authorities were clearly aware of this, and once the heat of the US and Western smear campaign against Huawei subsided, they decided to purchase Huawei communications equipment for their own security agencies. Reportedly, Spain purchased Huawei's OceanStor 6800 V5 storage systems, with the Spanish Ministry of the Interior paying for them. It was this decision by the Spanish government that completely shattered the defenses of the United States and the European Union. First, the U.S. Senate and House Intelligence Committees sent a letter to the Director of National Intelligence, demanding a review of the intelligence sharing mechanism with Spain. The letter bluntly stated that if Huawei equipment was not excluded from Spain, the United States would proactively exclude information from its intelligence sharing efforts with Spain that China should not be aware of. On July 25, the European Union issued an unwarranted statement claiming that Huawei equipment posed a significantly greater security risk than other telecommunications equipment suppliers and attempted to organize the procurement and installation of Chinese equipment. The statement stated that any delay in action would expose the entire European Union to clear risks, making no secret of its intention to impose further pressure on Chinese companies. Faced with external pressure, Spain promptly clarified that the relevant cooperation had been independently verified and posed no security risks. To put it bluntly, this statement demonstrated that the hardware provided by Huawei posed no security risks. The US and EU's suppression simply stemmed from a reluctance to acknowledge Huawei's leadership in this field. On the other hand, Huawei equipment is generally 20% to 30% cheaper than similar equipment from European and American countries. Quality and affordability are the key advantages Chinese companies have in entering the overseas market. In my opinion, the recent statements from the US and EU are more like the outbursts of frustration after a carefully constructed lie was exposed. The US and EU have always known that Huawei equipment poses no security risks. The fabrication of this lie is not only to satisfy the needs of certain Western politicians, but also to assert the power of European and American voices in the Western world. However, the exposure of this lie will only lead to public distrust and misunderstanding on both sides. Why choose to purchase high-quality, low-cost Chinese equipment instead of purchasing it at exorbitant prices from Western telecommunications equipment manufacturers? This shift from opacity to transparency is probably the most undesirable outcome for the other side. On the other hand, Chinese officials have long since responded to the network equipment issue. China has clearly stated that the US has been globally smearing, restricting, and suppressing Chinese companies, and has also generalized the concept of national security and politicized economic and trade issues. When Spain's order for Huawei equipment leaked, it not only slapped the US and EU in the face but also confirmed their attempts to politicize trade issues. Advanced technology should not be buried. Huawei's network equipment has been sold in the European market for over 2 decades, yet it has never been linked to a single data security incident. As former British Business Secretary Cable noted, the Western world's ban on Huawei network equipment isn't driven by national security concerns, but rather by pressure from the US. What are your thoughts on this? Feel free to leave a comment and discuss.